it's Maddie. Welcome back to my channel. And before I start today's video, I've gotten a lot of questions about what to do in dealing with diabetes and sickness, and if I've made videos on this, I have. I've just been getting a lot of comments lately, I think maybe because we're coming up on that time of the year when everybody's getting sick or possibly getting sick. So I did go through influenza A back in March. I did share that story and how I dealt with my blood sugars then, and I also went through some sort of either a stomach bug or E. coli type poisoning, what I think was from a salad from a fast food joint. I no longer eat salads from fast food joints, but anyways, I went through also a stomach illness with type 1 diabetes, and I shared how those two are kind of different, and I shared my stories about how my blood sugars responded and what I did in these situations I was put in. So anyways, that is that, and if you want to check those videos out, I will make sure to link them down below. But today's video, I'm just going to be sharing the 5 big nemesis foods of type 1 diabetics. Now, I'm sure there's tons more out there, but I'm going to hit the main 5 that I would agree that most type 1 diabetics have a hard time bolusing for, or they end up riding really high for hours and then really low, or they'll go low and then they'll go screaming high because of the way the foods digest or how different foods and the components in them respond to different people. So I'm going to go ahead and share how I bolus for some of these more difficult foods. Now keep in mind, I'm not perfect. I've been struggling with a lot more high blood sugars lately just because of school and stuff, and I'm not letting it get to me. And for a while, I've had a fear of taking tons of insulin just because of the E. coli bug I went through, and seeing how close I was to having to go in the hospital for low blood sugars. It definitely wasn't something I wanted to deal with. But now I'm getting better at making sure I'm taking the insulin that I need and stuff. And it's not like I was not taking the insulin I needed. I was just not giving it all up front. I was kind of doing tons of extended boluses when I really didn't need them. But now I'm getting out of that habit again and getting back into the swing of things. But keep that in mind that you're going to go through phases during your diabetes life or your diabetes journey where you're going to feel like diabetes is impossible to manage, or you're going to feel nervous, you're going to be fearful, you're going to be scared. But keep in mind that you will learn to adapt to those things and get yourself out of these situations. So the first food I have on the list here is desserts. So basically any type of dessert is going to contain sugars, carbohydrates, refined, processed things. Desserts, depending on how much fat they have, and then we'll determine how I'm going to kind of play around with them. But your standard desserts like ice creams, cakes, cookies, baked goods, I watch my portion size. I'll try to make desserts that are lower in carb or use stevia as an artificial sweetener. But if I am going to have a piece of cake, I usually kind of start looking at carb counting and estimating. Most cakes are going to be around 30 grams of carbs a piece for a standard size little piece that's about yay high and yay wide. A standard size piece of cake is going to have that with minimal frosting, of course. Now, if the frosting's extra thick, I might add a couple more grams of carbs just to cover for that refined sugar. But typically with the desserts, I will bolus and take a pretty good guess and use Google to kind of guide me into maybe how many carbs are in each piece of dessert or in the piece of dessert. And then I will bolus everything up front, and I will wait about 20 minutes before consuming the food so that it gives time for the insulin to work, and then I introduce the carbohydrates so it better matches, and I really don't go above 150 or 160 with most desserts. Now, desserts that have a lot of fat, maybe like cheesecakes or even really high fat ice creams, I would say I have to bolus most of that up front just because of the amount of refined sugar, but you may find you need to bolus a couple hours after, or kind of do a double bolus where you bolus most of it up front and then bolus a little bit more later, or put a temp basal on or something to just kind of stop that spike. Again, I will wait about 20-ish minutes before I eat any type of dessert. So and keep in mind, you're going to respond differently to different desserts. For me, yogurts don't really work well for me unless I eat the Oikos 000, or I think there's Two Good yogurts. I don't know if you guys have seen those, but they only have 3 grams of carbs, and they're very, very low on the glycemic index. Those are the only yogurts I really can handle anymore because they don't drive my blood sugar insanely high. The second item here I have on the list is pasta. Now, I particularly don't eat a lot of pasta, but when I do eat pasta, I try to find the pasta with the most fiber so that I can subtract carbohydrate count. Again, I take the portion that it recommends, and a typical portion of pasta is about 35 to 45 grams of carbohydrate. Add on your sauce, it's about an extra 5 to 10 grams of carbs, depending on what kind of sauce you get, and you're set to go for a filling meal. Pasta, again, spikes your blood sugar pretty quickly. So what I do is I cook my pasta up, and I wait, again, 20 minutes before I begin eating. Give everything up front, and I eat, and I usually don't spike past 160, 170 with pasta. Now, depending on if that pasta has a lot of cheese on it, or you add like meat and all kinds of protein to it, you may have to do an extended bolus, where you may have to bolus like 80% up front, 20% over a half an hour, or an hour, or 2 hours to kind of cover for that protein. It can happen. If I notice I'm sitting at, that 170 to 180 range for like too long of a period of time, I may put on a temp basal. And again, I'm going to do anything and everything I need to in the moment to keep my blood sugars as normal as possible, because I want to live a long, happy, and healthy life without diabetic complications. So that's what I do for pasta. Again, I don't eat a lot of it. But I find that the meals that work well for me, I take a mindful portion, or the portion it recommends. And let me tell you, a portion of pasta is actually fairly small compared to what most people eat. So I usually only eat pasta at home, and that's my second thing I recommend to use. Only eat pasta if you're going to be at home when you can control the portion size. Number 3 is rice. Rice, again, is a very high glycemic food. It's basically pure starch. Like a potato, but I handle rice and potatoes kind of similarly. I will count carbs, take a very mindful portion of rice. About a cup of rice is usually anywhere from 35 to 45 grams of carbohydrate, depending upon what kind it is. The more fibrous rices will have less carbs. The pure white rices will have more. But I found that taking white rice really does not bother me as much, as long as I take all the insulin up front. If I take 50 grams of rice or 50 grams of carbohydrated rice, I do bolus all of it up front. I wait 15 to 20 minutes, and then I do begin eating that rice. And I typically will have rice with something else, like kind of like in a stir fry or on the side at like a Chinese restaurant or something like that. But that's what I do with rice, and usually about 15 to 20 minutes after I finished eating the rice, I will put on a temp basal of 80% for an extra hour, and I won't go past 140 with rice. And now that's kind of incredible to me that I really don't spike as high from rice. Rice is one of those ones for me that, for whatever reason, I spike really quickly, but it's not super high if I put these precautions into place. Otherwise, prior to that, rice would send me to about 210, and I'd come crashing down. I want to go up to 140, 150, 160, even up to 180 would be acceptable, and come back down. I don't want to really exceed that 200 blood sugar level, because you don't know at that point what kind of damage you are doing. Number 4 is the high-fat foods like cheeseburgers, regular hamburgers, whatever the case may be. Kind of more like they have the heavy protein, heavy fat, heavy carb foods. Now, it depends on what kind of burger you're eating. Burgers at home are a lot easier to bolus for than burgers at McDonald's. Particularly because I swear McDonald's dumps tablespoons of sugar into their food. So again, a lot of these foods that are hard for a diabetic or type 1 diabetic to really bolus for, even though we can eat them, I highly recommend eating these at home if you can, because then you're going to be able to control the amount of carbs in the bun. You know where the meat came from. You know what you put in that meat. You know what you put it on that burger, or the toppings you put on. If you put mustard, onions, a little bit of ketchup, that's not going to impact you as much. Versus, going to McDonald's, you don't know what kind of crap that they're putting in there. Not like I'm saying McDonald's is healthy for you, and I don't recommend eating a ton of it, but if you're out and about, definitely carb count, and stick again with the standard of 30 to 40 grams of carbs for a hamburger. Now, again, it depends on the size of the bun is where most of your carbohydrates are going to come from, and that's going to spike you quick. So definitely take the insulin for the bread up front for sure. A bun's going to range from 20 to 30 carbs depending upon what kind of bread you're eating. And that is the bulk of your hamburger type carbohydrate, blood glucose raising portion. So bolus for that all the way up front. And then like the remaining whatever, say like 20 carbs was your bun, but you're pretty sure you have at least 10 carbs of like added ketchup or cheese or whatever else you put on your hamburger. that has some carbohydrate, I would bolus for that maybe later, or do the remaining over an hour, so you're not going to like drive your blood sugars low from all that slow digesting of the fats and the proteins in that meat. So bolus for your bread up first, and then kind of like allow that protein to be digested slower. Or if it works out for you, bolus it all up front. I know when I'm at home, I only have to bolus up front, only because I kind of can minimize the amount of extra fats and proteins I'm sticking into myself. Whereas if you're going out to a fast food restaurant, you don't really know what portion of meat you're getting. You really don't know like where the food's been or how much extra sugars they've added. So high-fat foods are a stubborn thing. Same with chocolates. I tend to look at the fat content in chocolate and candy bars and whatever the case may be, and if it's higher in fat, that indicates to me to do more of an extended bolus. Versus something that's higher in sugar and lower in fat, I'm going to need more of that insulin up front. And the fifth and final food, which a lot of you guys know I'm pretty good at bolusing for, is pizza. And this is, again, a itch with a B for a type 1 diabetic to bolus for. Number one, because of the carbohydrates, and number two, because of the high fat. But I kind of separated it into its own category, because pizza to me is a whole nother ball game, because you don't know about the sauce. The condiments can make a difference. The amount of heavy amounts of protein and heavy amounts of cheese can make for a whirlwind of a disaster. I typically need 60 to 70% upfront for pizza, and the rest over about an hour and a half to 2 hours. And I've noticed, depending on certain restaurants that I've gone to, one restaurant I need like a 75-25 over 2 hours. There's other restaurants that I go to where it's more like 50-50 over an hour. And there are some food or type pizzas, like a particular chicken barbecue pizza that I've talked to you guys about how I've bolused for, and I've done really well with this one on injections as well as on the pump. It's a particular pizza that's basically made of chicken and cheese and barbecue sauce and a very, very, very thin crust. It's about 36 grams of carbs for a quarter of a pizza, which you get a lot of pizza for a fairly good chunk of carbohydrate count. That one I need to bolus all up front for, just because of the fact that it doesn't have a high crust or a thick crust, and it doesn't really have a ton of cheese or added protein to where it's going to slow the digestion down of that little thin crust. So I do have to bolus all up front for that one. Otherwise, my blood sugars end up skyrocketing with that particular pizza. So be mindful about your pizzas, because they're all going to be treated differently. So that's kind of how I would say to go about pizza, but pizza is definitely one you want to check out extended bolus for, maybe even temp basals, depending on what works best for you. But one thing's for sure, do not let diabetes stop you from enjoying the foods that non-diabetics can eat, because in my opinion, you have one life to live, and if you can figure out a way to kind of run around with these different foods and make them work for your lifestyle and not drive your blood sugars high, then you need to go for it, and you need to stick with it, because to be like worrying your life away over not being able to eat a certain amount of carbohydrates is just ridiculous to me. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm trying to reduce the amount of carbs or reduce the glycemic index of certain foods to make it easier on myself. But if I want these things, this is kind of how I go about taking care of them. And like I said, I'm still going through a phase right now where I'm having a hard time remembering to pre-bolus, or I'm not giving, my extended boluses are going over too slowly for pizzas, and I'm ending up like at 200 and just sitting there, and then I end up having to take a shot and bring it down. But it's a learning curve, and you got to learn to kind of manipulate your diabetes management for the transitional phases that you go through in your life. Like right now, I'm in dental hygiene school, so that's a whole new ball game I've had to learn, and I've learned quite a bit about myself already, how to keep as normal blood sugars as possible without them going dangerously high and without them going dangerously low. So anyways, I will talk about that in a different video, but if you enjoyed this video, give it a big thumbs up. Feel free to hit that subscribe button down below. I post videos every single week about diabetes plus more. And keep in mind that the different dosages I suggested in today's video is what works for me. Keep in mind, what works for me may not necessarily work for you, but I hope these are good base points for you to kind of understand how I interpret the nutritional role of different carbohydrates, fats, and protein sources as a type 1 diabetic. So until tomorrow for another video, take care, God bless, be kind, spread positivity, and be thankful. Bye, everyone.